Many believe that toxic masculinity is a plague eating away at the fabric of our society. Yet, some argue it's merely a term coined to demonize men. What's your stance? Now, before we dive into this debate, let's briefly unpack what we mean by toxic masculinity. It's not about maligning all masculinity. Instead, it refers to a specific set of harmful behaviors and attitudes traditionally linked to some men, such as emotional repression, dominance, and aggression. The controversy we're exploring today is whether this so-called toxic masculinity is detrimental to men in society at large. It's a topic that sparks heated debates, with some arguing that it perpetuates harmful stereotypes and contributes to societal issues like violence and mental health problems. On the flip side, others contend that the term itself is detrimental, creating an unnecessary divide and casting men in a negative light. In the next few minutes, we delve into both sides of the argument. First, we explore the viewpoint that toxic masculinity does indeed harm men and society. Take a moment to imagine a world where men are always expected to be strong, unemotional, and aggressive, where any display of vulnerability is seen as a sign of weakness. This is the world of toxic masculinity, a world that many men find themselves trapped in. One of the most insidious aspects of toxic masculinity is how it represses emotions. Men are often conditioned to suppress their feelings, to never cry, to always be the strong, silent type. This emotional repression can lead to a host of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and even suicide. According to a study published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology, men who adhere to traditional masculine norms are more likely to suffer from mental health issues and less likely to seek help. Toxic masculinity also promotes violence and sexism. Men are encouraged to be aggressive, to dominate, to win at all costs. This can lead to a culture of violence where physical strength is valued over empathy and understanding. It can also lead to sexism where women are seen as inferior or objects to be won. A report by the World Health Organization found that men who hold sexist attitudes are more likely to engage in violence against women. The impacts of toxic masculinity don't just harm men, they harm society as a whole. A society where half the population is taught to repress their emotions, to value aggression over empathy, to view women as inferior, is a society that is fundamentally unbalanced. It is a society that is more violent, less empathetic, and less equitable. And the evidence backs this up. Studies have shown that societies with more rigid gender norms have higher rates of violence, lower levels of mental health, and less gender equality. In other words, toxic masculinity doesn't just harm men, it harms us all. So that's the affirmative stance. But what about the other side of the coin? Now, let's turn to those who disagree. They argue that the term toxic masculinity itself is harmful. They say that the phrase toxic masculinity paints all men with the same broad brush, creating a one-size-fits-all stereotype that is as damaging as it is misleading. They contend that this term, with its negative connotations, can lead to an unhealthy self-perception among males, causing them to feel unfairly judged or misunderstood. They argue that it can also create a culture of blame and shame that is counterproductive to positive growth and understanding. These critics of the term suggest that it creates an environment where men are made to feel guilty simply for being male. This, they argue, is not only unfair, but also unhelpful in fostering a more compassionate and understanding society. They believe that the use of the term toxic masculinity can actually perpetuate the very harm it is trying to address by reinforcing negative stereotypes and stigmatizing natural masculine traits. Another angle from the counter viewpoint is the concern that the term toxic masculinity might be used as a scapegoat to excuse poor behavior. By attributing negative actions to a societal construct rather than individual accountability, they argue that it allows for an easy out, a way to sidestep personal responsibility. They say that it's crucial to remember that actions are choices made by individuals, not predetermined outcomes based on gender. Those who disagree also highlight the importance of focusing on the positive aspects of masculinity, such as strength, resilience, and courage. They maintain that these traits are not inherently toxic, and that it's the misuse or exaggeration of these traits that can lead to harmful outcomes. In essence, the counter-argument posits that the term toxic masculinity can be more divisive than helpful, potentially alienating men rather than inviting them into the conversation about gender equality and respect. They believe that a more productive strategy might be to focus on promoting positive masculinity and individual responsibility rather than demonizing an entire gender. That's the counter viewpoint. So where does this leave us? As with most debates, perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It's undeniable that toxic masculinity can propagate harmful behaviors and attitudes, serving as a detriment to individuals and society alike. However, it's equally critical to remember that not all men are part of the problem. Many are part of the solution, advocating for change and challenging harmful norms. We must strive for balance, not stigmatization. It's about acknowledging the issues, but also recognizing the diversity of masculinity. Men are not a monolith, and masculinity is not inherently toxic. It's the extreme, distorted versions of masculinity that we term as toxic, and that's what needs addressing. Understanding and empathy should be our guiding principles. We must encourage conversations that challenge traditional norms, while also respecting the different ways in which individuals express their masculinity. So we've heard both sides, but what matters most is your perspective. Now it's your turn to weigh in. We've explored the controversy of toxic masculinity, heard from both sides of the debate, and attempted to find a middle ground. Perhaps you find yourself aligning more with one perspective than the other, or perhaps you're somewhere in between. That's the beauty of dialogue, isn't it? The ability to digest different viewpoints, to challenge our own preconceptions, and ultimately, to grow. We've scratched the surface of a complex issue, but the conversation doesn't end here. It's ongoing, dynamic, and it needs your voice. So let's keep this dialogue alive. Reflect on the points we've discussed. Ask yourself, what does masculinity mean to you? How does it shape your interactions, your perceptions, your place in society? Remember, the key to understanding and progress is respectful dialogue. We may not always agree, but we can always learn from one another. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation. If today's discussion sparked a new thought or challenged your existing views, don't let the conversation end here. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to join our community of thinkers and explorers. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.